I really want to thank our partner in presenting tonight's show, Dance Camera West. We're delighted to have the Executive Director of Dance Camera West, Lynette Kessler, here tonight to lead the discussion after the screening with Yvonne Rainer. And Dance Camera West features a film festival in June of dance-related media work, much of which is also experimental, I find. And whether it is or isn't, it's all really interesting and good. So that's one to get on their list about, and then they also sponsor various events through the rest of the year. So keep tabs on them as well. And then we're delighted to start here tonight is a full retrospective of the films of Yvonne Rainer. And I think it's the first time there's been a full retrospective of her works in Los Angeles, but there have been others elsewhere. And we'll be doing it over the course of the whole year. So I only list a couple of shows on the program notes tonight of the shows remaining this year in November and December, but there are 5 more screenings coming up from January through May. And again, Yvonne will be present at some of those with different people moderating the conversations to bring out different themes and interesting attributes of the film, so it isn't all just me, as it usually is. But tonight's work, just a brief note before I introduce Yvonne. We're screening from a video, and we'll be going straight through the show. The first 5 pieces, 5 easy pieces, are all silent. So there's all 5 are silent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a sound error with those first 5. But the most recent work, after many a summer, does have sound. And when I programmed the series, I thought it'd be interesting to start with her earliest work and her most recent work, all of which has relationship to dance as an appropriate thematic way and also a way to see some of the arc of her career. We'll be going through the wide variety of work that she's done, investigating a whole set of themes, media issues, representation issues, and so forth through the rest of the year. But to talk a bit more about her films, or to introduce tonight's program, please join me in welcoming one of the most important, I'd say, dance and media artists of the last 50 years in America, who we're delighted to have here in Los Angeles now much of the year. Please join me in welcoming Yvonne Rainer.
Thank you kindly. Nice to see such a full house. And thank you, Adam. What you'll see first tonight are, in succession, 5 what I like to call 5 short, early, boring films. You might well ask why show boring films, films I consider somewhat trying at this late date. I guess you can call them cultural curiosities. They belong to a certain period of my creative development. They were all made between 1969, 68, 69, 66 to 69. They're all without sound, and they last between 10 and 15 minutes. And 3 of them, at least, were shown in relation to dance performances, because I was a choreographer at the time. I went to a lot of avant-garde films. I was around to see early films of Warhol and Hollis Frampton, Michael Snow, people who were called minimalists or structuralists, and these films sort of fit into that movement, you might say. So the last is a video, is shot in video, and it corresponded to my re-entry into dance, and it's 2002. and the dance you will see in it was made for Baryshnikov's White Oak Dance project in 2000. And I had the foresight to bring a camera, a videographer in to document the rehearsals, which I melded into larger work that had to do with the avant-garde in turn of the century, 1900 Vienna. So it'll be continuous screenings, and Lynette and I will talk about all the work at the end. Hope you enjoy, and especially have a little patience with the first 5.
Again, please join me in welcoming Yvonne Rainer and Lynette.
Welcome, Adam. Thank you so much for doing this. The whole collection, the whole retrospect of Yvonne's work. It's going to be fabulous. You all have to come back. There's plenty of background information on Yvonne. There are some wonderful articles posted on the LA Filmforum's website. And Yvonne's book.
It's serious.
Yeah. Why is it so heavy? I was like,
it's a hardcover book.
Pick it up, it's really heavy. Anyways, I wanted to take it with me in my summer travels. I went, no, I'm not traveling with this book. You trained in theater before you started dancing, and I'm just curious, personally, did any of your training in theater involve being in front of the camera, or was it primarily stage work?
It was very brief. Yeah, I was on the stage in bit parts in San Francisco, studied with a group there. And I was never in theater when I came to New York. I studied. They didn't think I was very good, and I didn't think I was very good, and I made a pretty hasty transition to dance.
I was just curious about the whole film and how you transitioned into that. Your quote is, "My films always were meant to confound in a certain way." I want to bring in some other references before we get started. In the article that Aaron Ronigan wrote, Rainer's commentary is always characterized by skepticism, irony, rather than cynicism and pessimism. She wants to provoke and not alienate. Again, taken from Ronigan's writings, Rainer's position as an innovator within film practice, preempting major shifts in both feminist discourse and avant-garde film movements, which you're going to see in later films in the series, can be traced to her shift across disciplines, bringing ideas and strategies from postmodern dance, visual arts, and musical composition to the avant-garde film scene in New York. One of the most discussed aspects of Rainer's shift from dance to film has circled around her configurations of the performer-spectator notion and relationship. This began with Rainer's battle against narcissistic, voyeuristic model of dance performance, a critique that had ideological repercussions for the dance audience. Rainer's choreography was freed from the exclusivity of virtuosic dance. And then Aaron goes on to talk about challenging phrasing that evened out dramatic crescendos and an aversion to the dancer's gaze. There was
Version of, not to. Of. Yeah, I think that's a
Of,
misquote.
yes,
You're right.
I read it wrong.
I hated the dancer's gaze.
It's interesting because, okay, so you were doing this in the 60s and early 70s. I came to New York in my dance training in the 70s and early 80s, and that was such a normal thing to do, to dance that way. So it's interesting that you guys were pioneering that.
Dance what way?
Well, with Cunningham, it was all, there was no dancer's gaze. I mean, that's,
Oh, well, that's a very complicated issue, and there's a lot of discussion among my peers about what you did with your face when you danced. And the Cunningham convention was to have a very neutral expression. It is a non-expressionistic kind of presentation. The movement is what mattered, right? And just the opposite of Broadway hard sell dancing, right? Yeah.
so since we watched these films, these black and white films, even though I called Yvonne yesterday and said, what do you want to talk about? And she said, well, I don't want to talk about the boring black and white films.
No,
But
I
since we watched them,
yeah, right.
I'd like a couple questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I wasn't bored tonight.
Okay, so one of the things I wanted to ask in the first film, first of all, why are these films all silent? There's no budget for sound, or what was going on?
No, they were all about movement in the frame. It was all about framing, and I didn't think they needed sound, right?
That's true, they didn't. But
I mean, the first one always seemed kind of humorous to me. I mean, especially when the hand, you see the back of the hand, and it's like a little face, right? It's like little puppets or something. So it really is about animating in a way that transcends the actual member of the body. Yeah.
I was curious, how'd you shoot that? I mean, like, the camera was like the point of view of the camera. What, were you lying down? Do you remember?
All right, I was in the hospital with a serious intestinal condition, and a friend of mine brought a an 8mm camera in, and I think I was very weak, I was bedridden, and I think I just put my hand out against a white wall, right? I can't remember, but it must have been. I know it was in the hospital, and I wanted to make a dance, so that was all I was capable of.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so for volleyball, there's a choreography credit for that film. I saw somewhere. And so the ball, I assume, was random and subject to gravity.
Well, someone was rolling it in, yeah, and the unevenness of the floor made it. Again, this is about animating something that is inanimate, has no generative capacity of its own. So that contrast between the still legs and this moving ball that continues to move even after it's supposed to stop, right? I have to say that film was designed for a section of a dance called The Mind is a Muscle, and it was projected on a screen, pretty large screens, a downstage center, and the bottom of the screen stopped at hip level, and behind the screen was a group of 6 people who were moving in a clump, and sometimes you saw them on one side of the screen, sometimes on the other, and sometimes they came to rest behind the screen. So it was a study in contrast in scale. You saw the human scale legs and this big projection of these my legs blown up. So that was what it was, the original concept for that dance, for that film.
So Rhode Island Red. So what were you thinking about in the audience here when you were watching this? What did you think about it today?
Oh, I was very pleased they laughed when the chickens all in unison perked up. That again is about movement in a frame, very eccentric kind of movement. You do see a man, did you all see the man in the back gathering the eggs? It was an impossible situation. We both Roy Levin and I had to just leave the camera there. The atmosphere, there's no oxygen in that. You can imagine the aroma. And so we just left the camera going and went in and out of the chicken coop. Yeah.
So the trio film, there's, you know, obviously more direction in this film than in the earlier works that we saw.
Yeah.
Do you remember, were you setting these shots, or did you use the storyboard, or was it improvisational?
I never made storyboards. It was in an apartment that was being renovated, and so there's nothing on the walls, and there's nothing but this white furniture. And Virginia Dwan, who ran the Stable Gallery back in the 50s, and showed de Kooning and Rothko, and I was thinking again of something that is inanimate, that is and becomes an equal part of a duo, and two people. And the nudity, it was so formalized, and so structured. Nudity seemed an appropriate way to go in terms of costumes. Yeah, from off camera, I was telling them, okay, this next, setting up the next shot. Okay, you do this, that, the ball, bodies, and again, that's very much about framing. It's Phil Niblock suggested a lot of the angles. I remember. It has it felt to me tonight like a sort of Muybridge-like that kind of analysis.
Yeah, so it's sort of like you, me, ball makes three, or, you know, like looking at kind of like the emotional configurations of a trio, and a bunch of stuff going on in there. So with Trio A, which will be screened next month, it's completely different type of film with this constant unfolding of choreography, as it seemed to me. Is there any association between the two that share a similar name? Is there any reason?
Oh, Trio film and Trio A. Trio A was the first section of The Mind is a Muscle. It was highly choreographed, and it originally was for 3 people, so it was literally a trio.
Oh, that film.
Yeah.
Trio A.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And now it's done as a solo,
So line.
yeah.
What?
What?
I
don't know.
What was that little thing?
Well, they had a feminist reading has been made of it. A woman who is somewhat objectified, sexualized, a blonde, provocatively positioned in relation to the camera, but she's writing something. You don't see pinups writing anything. Cheesecake. So there's this contrast between, again, an animated object that is moving and sort of determines the length of the piece. I was giving her instructions, Susan Marshall, instructions off camera. Turn around, just talk to me, turn around again, write. I don't know, it was spontaneously choreographed. It's one shot, yeah.
Okay, so what you really wanted to talk about. After many a summer dies the swan, hybrid. The title comes from Aldous Huxley's book about a decadent millionaire's pursuit of immortality, set in the 1930s. Some say this film is returned within your film work to choreographic material. If so, then why does the text overshadow the dance? Initially, when I first watched it, I was focused on the text, and the dance was peripheral. And how and why did you choose the text over the movement for this film? Because it was a stage piece, right?
The dance, as you see,
Yeah.
an actual, a very bad video of the actual performance. You see a section of that, which was not done to the Schoenberg Transfigured Night. I was more interested in that history of the disintegration of the Austro-Hungarian empire and its effect on artists who were working and living in Vienna at that time. And the dance could be read as in all kinds of ways. A lot of that material came from, the text came from Karl Schorsky's Vienna Art and Culture, about the interaction of politics, culture, and art in Vienna at that period. And some of the texts, the titles came from Robert Musil's The Man Without Qualities, which is a scathing send-up of the haute bourgeoisie of that period. So every time you read they, it refers to that class who were giving up political power for art and theater. So the dance was like, it was like an illustrated manuscript in a way. It was used in that way. I know it's very hard to take it in. You want to look at the dance, and so that's why sometimes I made it very narrow. But again, it's about the frame, how you keep things moving in the frame when there's so much static material in terms of text. You seem disappointed as a dancer.
No, and actually what I really wrote down was, it was scurrying bodies, you know, instead of dance. I mean, because I was really intent on the text. That was very interesting to me. And then I would just see this
Peripherally.
movement, scurrying bodies, and then I'd look and say, oh, they're really doing something. They're not just scurrying around. No, I'm not that attached to dance.
And sometimes it's very clear what the connection is, like when they're doing that very strenuous athletic thing across the floor, and you read there was a time when they couldn't move forward or back, and they were paralyzed, and so literally with optical effects you can make them move backwards and forwards.
So you choreographed this dance. When was it performed? When were you working on it?
2000. In the beginning of 2000, Misha asked me to make a dance for his company. I hadn't choreographed for 25 years, and it was an offer I couldn't refuse, and I scoured my notebooks and memory and the assistance of one of my dancers who's still working with me, Pat Catterson, who studied with me in 1969 and has a memory like a steel trap, and she was my assistant, and so I kind of cobbled together old work and some new work and some voicings and bits of music, and I made this kind of pastiche, and I had about 20 hours of video from the rehearsal, and I began to just piece together bits of dance and these texts.
And so during the stage performance, was the text?
There were no texts. No.
Oh,
No. These texts were just for the video.
Okay, great.
No, there were no projections in the dance.
So I started thinking about when you were editing this. If this came out in 2002, you're probably editing like around 9/11, right? The year before?
No, 9/11.
2001?
2001. I don't know when was I? No, well, I was affected, certainly, by 9/11. I was editing after that. Yeah, right after that. It's true. Yeah. and it was very much, I was very conscious of certain parallels, you know, like the Bush, what the Bush regime was foisting on us. Thank you. And I didn't want to make explicit parallels between 1900 Vienna and now, but and what was attracted me to the Skorsky book was how clear he made it seem, those interactions between culture and politics, and it's very hard to do that in your own time. Like and we have such a dispersed kind of left politics, and yeah, I couldn't make sense of my own time, so it was by inference, you know, rather than trying to make direct connections.
You know, our time right now, it's similar. It's, you know, the turn of the century was 10 years ago, and by all indications, there's a, you know, comprehensive meltdown going on. Pretty much everything, the economy, the environment, politics, the vision of wearing burqas and living in caves isn't too far off. And but what is your opinion on current art, the current art state of affair? If the avant-garde is defined as a tradition of attacking the elite and its illusions of order and permanency, or at least the status quo, you know, what would you hope to see in the young avant-garde crusader of today? Yeah.
It's a big one.
Yeah. But, or in other words, are the artists today, are we kicking butt enough? I mean, are we out there enough, in your opinion, in relation to your whole life work?
Yeah. Now let me say, I don't get out much, but my partner, Martha Gievers, has been studying the YouTube for the last 2 years. There are amazing things that are in there that are kicking butt, right? And in fact, she's curating a show at UCI, you know, open in January, and I've been very buoyed up by some of the things she's shown me. You know, very political work, very critical. What effect it has, I don't know, but certainly the internet has changed our lives, and has certainly made all this electronic stuff has made certain things possible that were not possible 100 years ago, like the way that the protests in Iran came about through the internet, email and Twitter and all that. And so, yeah, things at the time is very, very different. People can't, the politicos can't get away with what they used to get away with, and obviously that's one thing. I don't know. You know, I was raised by anarchists, and even though I was all gung-ho for Obama, I mean, you read about the structures that he promised to change in Washington, they're not changing, and so, you know, I'm skeptical, not totally pessimistic, as you quoted. Yeah.
So I'm sure there's questions out there lurking. Is that your hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
I was curious about two things, so maybe let me just start with the first one. I was curious about ending points, particularly in 5 Easy films in that series. How you came to end points for each of them.
You mean the duration?
The duration, yeah.
It was the length of a reel of film. It was a trio film. I think Phil helped me edit it, we used up all the material, you know, and it came out to about 15 minutes. Yeah, it was, yeah, it wasn't arbitrary, it was governed by what we had, yeah.
The second, can I ask the
Oh,
second
yeah.
thing? The second thing, I'm sorry, was also what sort of took you from live performance into film as a medium, and then after that, you said you stopped choreographing for
Yeah.
quite some time before you went back.
Yeah.
What those transitions were about?
Well, that's a long story. In short, going from dance to film, it was aging body. It was interest in experimental film from an early age. It was feminism. It was writing and wanting to deal with language and wanting to deal with specific social and political issues that the kind of dance I had done up to that point was not capable of expressing. So film seemed a natural way to go. The way it can combine language and print and visual material. And sometimes I state it as the stage just got chipped up into the frame. And controlling where your gaze goes. On a stage you can look all over the place, and here I have more control. And then going from film back to dance, it was the expense, and I wasn't going to make a crossover film that would have more commercial life. So in 1996 was my last feature. I'd gotten every grant that I could get, and the NEA had closed down, and the American Film Institute was no longer giving grants, and I'd gotten all of those. I'd gotten a MacArthur. Okay. So I was not, and each film had doubled, tripled in cost. So Misha, I wrote poetry for a year, didn't know what I was going to do, and then Bershnikov came along, and I jumped. I kind of go where the wind blows now. So the wind keeps blowing in choreography.
Lars?
Yeah. Hi. I'm really curious about, also in five Easy Pieces, you were saying that it's about sort of movement within the frame, and I felt really conscious of you, or just the exterior of the frame in so many of the pieces, like in Trio, the person who's throwing that balloon back and forth, or even, the girl, you were saying that sort of, if there's a feminist reading, she's like looking back at the camera, and it's like whatever, which is perhaps more political or agended, or even just in, let's see, what was the other one? Well, there was the guy with the chickens, and there was you guys just not being there. I was totally thinking about that. I was like, oh, so they're just like huddling behind this camera. Yeah, I'm thinking really hard about the off-screen sort of story, or in volleyball, obviously. Like, I think like maybe the third or the fourth take, you just see the kind of like ball like go off, and you're like, oh shit, it's not going to stop at this person's feet, and then it's like kind of comes back. And I was thinking about the maker and the influence on the environment of the maker on the outside, like both behind the camera, but also sort of, I guess in theater terms, sort of like backstage or to the side.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if that was, if over the course of your career, or just as a filmmaker, your agenda with that has sort of, is it relatively arbitrary, and it's based on piece by piece, and the kind of how things, it seems like things like turn up for you, as you were saying, with the way the wind blows, and like what the situation is, like you take your opportunistic. Sure.
But what you say reminds me of my relation to the stage space, which is my territory now. I've never liked the wings, the off stage, so when people aren't dancing, they stand around and they look at the other people. Or in the instance where one of my dancers couldn't come and I filled in at Red Cat last June, I came from the front seat, then went back and forth, or sat on a couch and watched after doing my bit. So that aspect of looking and being looked at, a lot of this came from feminist film theory in the 70s, Laura Mulvey and all those English screen writers who were talking about the gaze, the masculine gaze and all that. But I think it had meaning for me in a more general way about what it means to be in front of people. How do you comport yourself, and how do you make that relationship of looking, how do you foreground it? So I found all kinds of ways in film to do that, and now again in dancing. Does that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Deborah, you have a question?
Many. I love the 5 pieces of sound. No, please, it was very engaging. And the chicken thing was so noisy, actually. I guess the swan piece. I was wondering. I mean, it's kind of an obvious question, but you know, your exploration and your exploration in the text of, you know, what was happening in this haute bourgeois world. Were you playing at all with Baryshnikov's presence?
Of course, yes. I mean, he appears right at the beginning, and you read about the count.
He's a prince, right?
He's a prince,
Yeah.
of course.
Okay.
Yeah, and the title, Swan.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, he's immediately recognizable, right? I have to deal with that celebrity. In the actual dance, there was a comic moment. I had to bring him down. I mean, he's dancing with. He's the famous person. How do you deal with that in the actual dance? And so I had Michael Lomika, at one point they're doing something they're just walking on a diagonal. I said, okay, walk on his heels, and he actually got his shoe off, and he had to bend down and tie up his shoe. So I had to bring him down to human scale.
Was he ready to be brought down by
Oh,
you?
absolutely, absolutely. Oh, yeah. He's amazing to work with.
And Yvonne, what about all the language in that thing after your? Well, there's a huge gap between this swan piece and the first pieces that we
yeah,
see.
I was going to say.
So did you
get
get
out here?
noisy?
Did the same person make these?
Yeah, it's really striking. I mean,
Yeah.
so were you just dying to talk by the time?
No, I had made 7 feature films where there's lots of talking. No, language was no
stranger to you.
Oh, I see. Looking at that, you think, she's dying to talk.
Yeah.
No, I have been talking for a while.
I know it's sort of unfair to ask a question about something that we didn't see tonight, but I thought in June that you said something about your current work being about death. Is that
Death.
is that a mischaracterization?
Well, this is certainly about death. Yeah.
Can you talk
Um,
about that?
Currently about death? Oh, did I say that?
Yeah, I thought so.
Well,
but if it's
I
wrong,
follow,
then
my
just-
work follows my own, I'm on the latter half of my life, and so you start thinking about these things. Your friends are dying, and it's something to deal with. Yeah.
Any other questions?
There was a lot of, I think you mentioned it earlier when you first introduced it, but there's a lot of optical illusions in the 5 easy pieces, and it seemed like dimensionally it was always confounding for me.
It's always what?
Confounding or perplexing, and I would like something that was looked flat would suddenly gain.
Well, line, I was very aware
Yeah.
of that. When you first see that object, you don't know whether it's very large far away
Yeah.
or very small close to you. Are you looking at the sky? Are you looking at a telephone line, a telegraph
Yeah,
line?
that's what I saw
Yeah,
was the telephone
yeah,
line.
yeah.
Um,
Uh-huh. Yeah, I
I-
see that also.
Yeah, and I think that was the most prominent, but there was other points in the hand and with the chickens. And I was wondering if that was like a starting point for your ideas, or if you were concerned with other stuff, because I wasn't, as a spectator, thinking about dance as much, or if you were thinking about dance and that just these optical illusions came with other ideas, or if they were a starting point, or if that's not.
Can't remember.
Yeah.
I have to tell you how, another instance, how one of these films was projected. There's a dance on, the only time I've ever been on Broadway is a big dance festival in a Broadway theater, and I had a group of about 12 people, and I wanted to show a pornographic film, and Steve Paxton had dug this up. It was literally dirty. It was a dirty print, and it was pornographic. A classic, the milkman comes and the housewife lets him in, and they go at it. Well, and it's all very scratchy film. So the way I showed that film, and let's see, from where you are, it would have been, that film was shown on the proscenium art, or the column here, and the trio film was over here, and I had the whole bunch of dancers standing in a line, just moving their rib cages back and forth. So there was this very formal thing with the body, rib cage, and then a dirty film over here, and a nude, nudity, but very unerotic over there. So I felt there was this. They didn't let me. The projectionist, we had to engage, use a bit of duplicity to get into the projector, and the house manager, finally, after about, it lasted for about 3 minutes, they let it run before they realized what was happening. That has nothing to do with what you were saying. Sorry.
Any other questions? Okay, yeah.
You're talking about the gaze, or the male gaze, that there's criticism there and addressing it, and then you're talking about the face, the dancer's face, and then turning to film or using film. Did you find that you lose the capacity of the viewer, and there's not the back and forth between the audience, the viewer, and the viewee to have an exchange that's live? And I'm just wondering if that, or what do you have to say about that? And that's sort of one
Well,
of the
you
first
do
questions.
give that up when you go into film.
Did you find it was like an advantage, or were you really aware of that? I mean, I'm sort of asking the question, what would your response be? That you look at the audience?
Well, you use other devices to foreground the act of looking, like long duration. The audience becomes aware of looking, and a film about a woman which will be screened in the future. There's another, I seem to be focusing on pornography. I thought, okay, if I were to make a pornographic film, what would it be? And so I had a man and woman very formally dressed, he in a tuxedo and she in a long dress, and they disrobe another woman, and he's pulling down her underpants, and the film tracks back, and then he's pulling them up, and the film, the camera tracks forward. It lasts a long time, and you become aware of your own voyeurism, possibly. That's one.
It's an intention. that you
Yeah. So there are all kinds of ways to. I also think of film conventions, narrative conventions, shot, reverse shot, and all that. I began to use more of that in the later films, but there's always something that's a little awry. So I was very conscious of distanciation, of how you draw the audience in, how you push them away, or make them think about critically, more critically, about what they're looking at. So that was always on my mind, both as a choreographer and a filmmaker.
But how much, like a sense of confrontation did you look for? Do you remember periods where you were looking for more confrontation
Sure.
with an audience? Than later,
I wanted,
maybe?
if not to shock, I wanted to, I don't know, knock your socks off, or
Confound, I think.
confound, yeah. Ambiguity, incongruity, all these things are factors. Humor is a way of, is a kind of confrontation.
I saw a performance by a painter recently. His name's Merlin Carpenter, and I didn't see the performance. I saw the aftermath. He suddenly in a crowded room took paint and did these sort of threw paint. He didn't touch the brush to the canvases. He threw paint all around them. And I saw afterwards, and the first thing that I said to him when I met him was Yvonne Rainer. I said, "Your name."
I never threw paint around.
I know. But for some reason, something that I know, right? Very, yeah, it's maybe a very male thing to do.
What
Someone
made
said
you think
Jackson
of me?
Pollock, but
Yeah.
I don't think it had anything to do.
Did he throw it at the audience?
But my sense was, no, maybe a drop got here or there. But my sense was this set was pushing an object or touching an object or moving an object, projecting the will or projecting energy onto an object. And he did it through space without touching. I was really aware of when he touched the brush to the canvas. For some reason, there's something that I'm hearing in your voice or seeing in your work made me think of that. Now I may be really off, but I've read some things by you and I saw the film you're talking about and that. But there's a sense of this, there's a screen, an actor occurs, the dancer acts on space. Sound travels through space. There's a physical presence. It's like a physical volume of information and that. And is there anything that you could speak about that in terms of there was the volleyball moving, there was the ball that was being passed between the people. To me it was like a volume of language. It could have been a whole, it kind of represented that without being like a metaphor or whatever, but it seemed like this like physical quantity that
And
they were
there's the
passing
small
between.
ball that Bershnikov in the solo, this object that.
Right. And
I loved playing in the streets when I was a kid with balls and all kinds. These three different balls tonight.
well, are they balls specifically? Could they have been like a big foam cube? They were props used.
Objects, I think
Yeah,
objects is what
objects.
we're talking about.
Yeah.
Can the
This
object-
interplay between an object that moves and a body that, in my early dances, you even see the residue of it here, where Emily is lifted,
Yeah.
supported. A body can be used as an object. And that box I used in early dance, interchanging the box and a body. What you did with the box, you did with the body. Yeah, it's all a metaphor about embodiment, I guess, and the interchangeability of or equivalence, making equivalent. It was a part of the minimalist aesthetic, I guess. and a reaction to what not only I, but my contemporaries felt was an inflated and overly expressionist form of dancing, Graham and Limon and so forth.
Just because.
Actually, we should sit them down.
So the second work, at what point did you realize the second work was a work? Because it started as a commission, right? And then you said you had the foresight to bring it in the camera to document. Were you starting to have the thoughts of Austria and such at that point?
Yeah, I was
Oh,
reading
really?
Karl Schorsky's book.
Oh,
Yeah,
then
while I
you
was
got the
while I
commission.
was making that dance.
okay, and so then you just thought to combine it.
And I thought I could use some of this dance for another purpose, although the Schorsky material didn't enter the dance that I was making. Yeah. It's one of the rare times that I was kind of working on two projects at the same time in my head. I rarely do that. Usually everything that comes in my head goes into the one thing I'm working on. But yeah, I realized I was on two channels.
One last question.
How is the object center stage on the last piece? How is that meant to be read by the viewer?
The object, what object?
It was like a box. That
Oh,
had
the box.
Had
Oh,
a spherical
yeah.
object on top of it.
No, it had a piece of paper and a microphone. She pushes the box in, and yeah. Well, that's a reference to early work in which I, as I described, I used this box, about the same size. Here it, how was it? This final configuration where the instructions are, you make it as hard as possible for yourself to move that box a fraction of an inch. So they had to keep communicating, okay, I'm too close, take me farther away. So the bodies got really stretched and elongated. So it was, the box in that case lent itself to this operation. It also, it could be seen as work coming out of a factory. That final, what Manu speaks into the microphone about the discordance between what executives make and what factory workers make. Of course, it's much more now. In 1998, it's 400 something times more. And imagine 10 years later what it has been. So it had different purposes, functions at different times.
Like a contemporary example of like the interaction with an aesthetic, like visual art on it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Clear
that's what
as talking
right,
about
right.
the
A
history
minimal
of-
box, a Robert Morris box, a Don Judd box. Yeah.
So, we need to close this up. We can continue talking after, but I want to formally close it. I want to thank Yvonne for her. Another 7 months.
November 8th, we'll have Trio A and Lives of Performers to see more work on performance related as well. And we'll have Yvonne back in December, on December 6th, with The Man Who Envied Woman, and then a conversation with Bernice Rainer after the film. Hope you can make it to one or both of those. Thank you all very much.
And then it continues into 2010, but those dates aren't set yet. Thank you for coming.